Okay, this is the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. It's probably about 50 blocks from the downtown Salt Lake City area. This Dillard's right here is the site of the old Sears building. Back in November of 1974, they just actually replaced it. It was still there about a year ago, even less than a year ago. But anyway, this is the parking lot on the south end of the building. On November 8th, 1974, a 18-year-old girl named Carol Daronch had actually stopped here at about 6:30 at night on a Friday night, and she was just kind of coming down here to see what was going on as far as like friends and things like that, as teenagers do. She was a recent graduate of Murray High School, which is just down the road. This is where she would have parked her yellow Camaro back in those days, and then she walked in the entrance over here. I'm actually redoing this video. I did this a while back, but my YouTube channel got blown up, and the video wasn't that great anyway. I did it on an older phone, but anyway, so she would have walked in this entrance right here, which has changed considerably. The whole mall is, of course, you know how that goes. But she went inside. She ran into some of her friends, or actually a couple of cousins and a couple of friends, and she stopped in the mall and she chatted with them for a while. And after that, she ended up going towards the middle of the mall and stopped at a bookstore called Walden's Books and looked at a few books in the window. As she did that, she was approached by a tall, good-looking guy in his late 20s with a mustache and a jacket, and he introduced himself as Officer Roseland of the Murray Police Department. She was kind of shocked by that. He said that he asked her if her car had been tampered with in the parking lot. She said, "No, I don't think so. I just came in and whatever." And he said, "Well, I have a report that your car has been violated with like a wire coat hanger. And can you come with me? Let's go look at your car." And she said, "Okay," you know, kind of weird. So they went out to the parking lot where we just were. And he asked her what her license plate number was, and she repeated it, told him what it was. And I think that's kind of funny because I couldn't tell you what my license plate number is right now if you asked me. And she knew it and told him, and he said, "Yep, that's the one." They went out. There was nothing wrong with the car. And he said, "That's kind of funny. I think we better go back inside and see if we can partner up with my partner." This was Ted Bundy, and he was operating as a plainclothes detective. So they would have came out on these far doors over here of the mall over here. And, I'm sorry, they went back inside and looked for the supposed detective who wasn't there. So he said, "Okay, now we need to go over to the Murray Police Department substation, which is nearby, and file a report." And at that point, she was kind of like, "Can I see some identification or something?" And he laughed at her. And then she was kind of like, "No, really, man, I need to see some ID." So he flashed some sort of a badge at her. And so she said, "Okay." And I think she felt weird about it, but she did it anyway because she felt like she had to, kind of thing. Because he was this older, more confident guy, and she was only 18 or whatever. Anyway, this is 6100 South. So what they did was they walked across this parking lot from the mall, out of those doors we were just at. And, of course, we got traffic. Even though it's like 10 o'clock on a Friday. Why isn't everybody at work? Why am I not at work? These are all good questions. So anyway, he said, "Let's go over to the substation." They came over to these doors. This was a laundromat at that time. This building right here, right behind this car. You can see the door right there, actually. This is 139 6100 South. I don't know if you can see this, but there's actually, let's see, we'll hold it down there in the shade. You can tell that's the same door. Right on that door it said 139. And apparently Ted knocked on that door right there. And it was a laundromat at the time. And you can see it says 139 on the window. It's been painted over. I think it's an ex-hookah lounge of some sort. So of course nobody answered. So he said, okay, we're gonna have to get in my car. And by this time she was kind of weirded out. Like, really? Now I gotta get in his car? So I'm gonna whip it around here. He actually had his little tan Volkswagen. And you know, I hear different reports that it was tan or it was light blue. He actually had a couple of 1968 Volkswagens during his time when he was here in Washington. I believe it was tan, and it would have been parked right over here. He had it parked this direction, or excuse me, pointing the other direction, right about here at the time. They whipped, it was pointing down this direction. They whipped it around, did a U-turn, and came up to this street, which is called Fashion Place Boulevard up there by the light, which is essentially 300 West, and took a left on this street here. There may or may not have been a stoplight here at that time. Probably not. This might have just been a three-way stop in those days, but it's called Fashion Place Boulevard, but this is the same street. Now, when she got in the car, she immediately noticed alcohol on his breath, which kind of freaked her out. She definitely noticed that, and you know, as you would. I mean, can you imagine you get in a car with a cop and he smells like booze? It's definitely a little, you know, that would have been a little unnerving, I think, for sure. Not that cops didn't drink on the job. I mean, maybe they did. I'm sure they did, but anyway, they stopped at this intersection, went through it. This is McMillan Elementary School right here, right across the street. Let's go through the stoplight, and right up there about where those cars are, that silver car that's ahead of those two SUVs, he drove along here and he stopped the car, apparently popped up onto the curb, which there's a little spot right there, he could have done it, and then he turned over and he looked at her and apparently just stared at her. And so at this point she kind of said, why are we stopping? He whipped out a pair of handcuffs, according to her, whipped one onto her left wrist, and a struggle ensued. Actually, I take that back. She actually opened up her door and put one foot out onto the sidewalk, and as she did that, he whipped out his handcuffs and put it on her left wrist. Struggling, screaming, freaking out. She actually got out of the car, but not before he actually got the other handcuff on the same wrist. As she came out, she was on this side of the car, and he whipped out his own, came around the driver's side, had his crowbar, and was trying to hit her with it. His crowbar was his main tool, was subduing his victims. And this is all at 6:30 at night. It was probably fairly dark by now, or getting very dark. And anyway, he had her pinned up against the car, and he was trying to hit her, and she was very strong. She ran, and she got out in the middle of the street right over here, and where this car is coming, there was a car coming driven by Mary and Wilbur Walsh, who were described as being an older couple, 60s and 70s, and they actually, she jumped in the passenger seat, and Wilbur just gunned it. He just flew down this street, and Ted probably went off the opposite direction to the next street and got back onto State Street. Now this is 5900 South. Wilbur took a right here, and he was going to take her down to the police department, which is just right down the road from here. So they're flying down the road here. Carol's freaking out, talking about this guy. He tried to abduct her, tried to handcuff her. She's got the handcuffs on. She's basically sitting on Mary's lap as they were doing this. And Wilbur came up to the stoplight up here. And as you can imagine, their adrenaline was probably pretty pumped up. Oh, and they were coming home from a church function. So they, oh shit, I'm sorry, dude. Oh shit, I'm sorry. Whoops. That's why you don't use cameras when you're driving. So they came all the way down here, and like I said, she was a recent graduate of Murray High School, which would have been down here right on the left-hand side. The old building is not there anymore, but some of the older outer buildings are still there to this day. And the Murray Police Department is down here about 5 blocks. Ted, meanwhile, had probably gotten back on this street and more than likely had taken a left on a street called 5300 South and gotten on to I-15 heading north up to Bountiful, where he actually abducted Debbie Kent at a school function at Viewmont High School that same night. He went up there. There was a play called the Redhead playing, and he had spent some time wandering around the school while the play was going, talking to the teacher who ran the play, Raylene Shepard, who later identified him with a driver's license after he had been caught in August 16th, 1975 by Bob Hayward out in West Valley, Granger area. Anyway, so they came down here, Wilbur and Mary Walsh and Carol, and not quite here, just past this park. Just up here on the right. And this is where the Murray Police Department is still, to this day, is located. This is the original building. Went inside and was tried to be interviewed by detectives while she was there, tried to describe this guy. She was very hysterical at the time and didn't give very relevant information. She told the police that he had actually pulled a pistol on her during that interaction at the elementary school at McMillan, but I highly doubt that. I don't think Ted ever had a pistol. He didn't have a gun. There's no evidence, I should say, that he ever used a gun. But then again, she was one of the only victims that ever lived, you know, to tell the tale. But he certainly never used a gun in his murders. But so this is where it all went down. They went inside here. And later on, Ted was caught, like I said, on August 16th by Robert Hayward out in West Valley, a sergeant in the Utah Highway Patrol, who was just sitting out in front of his house when Ted drove by. And after that, it really blossomed. You know, they had this guy in custody, and by early September, Carol was asked to do a lineup. But before that happened, she was asked to go to his residence and identify his car, which they had to do several times because his car was always missing, or it just wasn't there at his residence of 565 First Avenue in Salt Lake, which is way down that direction downtown. But this is where it all went down. Carol Daronch, November 8th, 1974. And there's a heck of a lot more to this story. Obviously, I could go on and on about this, but that's the route, and that's essentially what happened that very night.